Nicole and I have had the pleasure of doing this together in a few different cities over the past several weeks, and I have gotten really spoiled because now I'm used to seeing you every other week.
I know.
And what even am I gonna do for the rest of the year?
I don't know who you're gonna have breakfast with for the rest of the year.
I don't know who I'm gonna have breakfast with. We're just gonna have to come up with more and more excuses to hang out.
Absolutely.
Nicole, tell us about your career story. What is your current role, and how did you get to where you are today?
So my career story is very non-traditional. Currently, I serve as the head of security for the games division at Riot Games. So I'm really helping build out their business information security program and actually helping different parts of the business work a lot better with security, not just from an engineering standpoint, but from a strategic standpoint. I started my career right here in New York City on Wall Street, studied finance and accounting. I never thought I would work in tech. However, I started going through the motions and I did some consulting, then I got into entertainment. I've worked for a few media and video game companies. I've built teams overseas. The common thread I saw in all the roles that I did was that I was somehow connecting business through technology. And because I came from Big Four, consulting and audit, I was always thinking about what could go wrong. And so I really learned that cybersecurity was really like risk in technology and kind of having a baby. And so I figured it was the perfect place to help these different worlds and these different teams work together. And it's been great because, and I think we talked about this earlier, when we think about all the things that we want or that we need to happen in security, you can have all the tools, you can have the right configurations, but you actually need people to decide to do this, right? So that's a huge, huge part of where I find success in my role is getting the business, getting the engineering teams, all the people who use tech but don't necessarily think about the inner workings of it to think about how to do everything they want to do just a lot more securely.
Nicole, I think that you come to the security table with a particularly business-oriented mindset. You understand the finance side of things. You understand the audit side of things. What does the relationship between security and the business look like if they don't have someone like you, if they don't have someone that gets it? Can you kind of draw a picture for us of what does a typical relationship between security and the business look like?
So it depends, and it depends on a few different things. Culture plays a big part of the organization. The industry that the company is in, right? You have some industries that are significantly higher regulated, like when I worked at a payroll company versus where I work in an entertainment company where the regulation, the landscape is a bit different. What I typically find is that a lot of how the business and security work together or what the temperature of that relationship looks like at the organization really depends a lot on the relationship that the CISO has with the remainder of the operational leaders. Right? And I think we've all seen, in the news, they're outlining these different types of CISOs, the risk CISO, the strategy CISO, the technical CISO. But it really is, a subsequent downstream impact of those conversations. So is it, we can't do that. The business hears a lot of we can't do that, they will circumvent security, they will go around, it will be a last minute thing, if a thing at all. But then you have some CISOs who are very much like, tell me exactly what it is you want to do. And how can I help you do that? I'm going to tell you how I can help you do that in the most secure way possible. That's when I see really, really good integration of business and security because we become less of the department of no and more of, okay, we can do that, but you've got to add on a couple of other different things. So it is a wide variety. And each of those teams have their challenges, but again, it depends on a few different things, namely the industry, company culture, and the CISO.
Yeah. Nicole, I would love to hear your thoughts on why being a CISO is so hard. And in particular, if you can talk about some of the different audiences that an effective CISO needs to be able to communicate with.
Yeah. So I interviewed someone who was a CISO, and he said, He described his job as being the single wringable neck for all things security. I think that's what makes the CISO's, one of the layers that makes the CISO's job very difficult. I think another thing is, depending on the culture that we talked about at the organization and the temperature and maturity of the security team, in the entire security ecosystem, sometimes I feel like we don't engage CISOs until we need them, right? And sometimes by then it's a little bit too late. And so then there's this pressure of having to, really save and pull everything together when it's like, had you just listened to me, how many days ago, how many weeks ago, how many meetings ago, we probably wouldn't be here. But the thing is, another layer as to why the CISO is difficult is because they have so many different people that they have to engage. Right? So they have to engage the board, right? That's an entirely different dynamic. They have to engage the rest of the C-suite, right? And each of these people are very, very focused and experts in what they do, but we have to essentially change their hearts and minds about security. Then we've also got to talk to the entire associate population at an organization and get them to think about security, because if we look at a lot of what's happening, these incidents, typically social engineering is how our organizations are being infiltrated, or our systems or our environments are being, kind of penetrated. And so there's this constant requirement of being dynamic, being flexible, knowing your audience, changing the conversation to appeal to that person. You're always calculating what's in it for them. And then you've got to run your security team, and you've got to fight the bad actors, right? Regulation is developing, that gets more complex as you expand into a global enterprise. The threat landscape is constantly evolving. It's a never-ending job. And I think we need to give our CISOs a bit more praise and a lot more grace.
Yeah, that is a challenging role if ever I heard about one. I am so grateful to our CISO, Andrew, who will be joining me up here in a couple of hours for our DevSecOps panel. Nicole, you are the LinkedIn Learning Instructor for a course on the BISO, which is a relatively new role. For folks who haven't gotten a chance to watch your course yet, I wonder if you'd give us a little preview.
Yeah.
What's a BISO?
Yeah. So a BISO is a Business Information Security Officer, and they are tasked with helping the business understand how security intersects with their goals, their initiatives, but they also advocate back to security on behalf of the business, right? So they are a bilateral liaison that's essentially serving two masters, but really helping to balance the scales. I think the biggest thing to think about with the BISO role is we have somewhat of like the foundational maintenance things that we have to do from a security perspective, right? However, I think sometimes we can get very caught up in those things, just kind of in our normal, standard operating procedures, but we also need to really showcase ourselves as enablers of what the business is looking to accomplish, right? Because more than likely it's going to involve technology, more than likely it's going to involve data, and more than likely it's going to involve people. And so essentially BISOs are really, really tasked with bringing all those things together and figuring out a way to ensure that security has service offerings that the business needs, and that the customer or the user experience, right, the business, when they make use of those actual tools and technologies, that we're helping them do that in the most thoughtful way and in a way that's effective and efficient, but most importantly, relevant. So it is, one of the questions I get a lot is, well, what's the difference between a BISO and a CISO? Well, the CISO has their overall strategic plan, right, and things that they seek to accomplish. But the BISO is there to not only showcase that plan throughout the business, but help the CISO understand the different idiosyncrasies across the different businesses and how they may need to shift that plan to apply, or what are some exceptions. So it's a fascinating role. I love that it leans on the expertise of people, right? There's some negotiation and influence. Because the complex part is that you don't really own anything, but you influence everything. And that makes it really, really exciting and challenging.
Yeah. So walk me through a day in the life of a BISO. Day to day, what do you find yourself doing when you're in a BISO role? Day to day, what do you find your team members doing when you're leading them in their BISO roles?
So this is interesting because it varies day to day. I think all of our jobs vary day to day in security. One of the first things is that I am always attending what we call at Riot rituals, or the recurring meetings of the business teams that I support, right? So sitting in on those meetings, understand what their priorities are, understanding what their challenges are from a leadership perspective. Then I have a team of what I call game team in bed. So these are engineers from across all domains in security who sit in on the very engineering and tactical rituals that happen at the games teams. And so we're always connecting to make sure that the strategic vision of games leadership is matching what we're actually focused on at the tactical level, and then making some shifts in between. We are growing as a business. So as we're expanding into other territories and other regions, I'm actually building out a BISO program to support those businesses. So for example, if we have a new location in a new country, we may not necessarily understand initially what they're focused on or what their priorities are. So a BISO will actually be placed there to help us understand business strategy so we can construct the appropriate security team to support that. And I'm doing very much of what I'm doing in the business in security. So sitting in with our product leads and our domain leads and our SLT meetings, reading customer feedback, going through our Slack channel, seeing what people are talking about, and just making sure that we're all connected, we're all synced up, and where we have gaps, I'm really filling in those gaps for the business as well.
You know, I remember a time in my security career when I thought that the most important thing to do was to understand all the technical details of the latest breach. And there was a shift when I realized, oh, maybe what's really important for me is to go to our company all hands and understand the company's strategic priorities. Maybe it's actually really important for me to attend our investor meetings and understand how folks think about it from a totally different perspective than many technical security people. How do you even find these meetings? How do you get yourself invited? How do you get a seat at the table? I think that when I think about folks that I know in technical security roles, I don't know if they even know who to talk to. I don't even know if they know how to get into that meeting or how to get people to show up for your meetings. Do you have any practical advice?
Sure. I think it's a really important thing to think about. The first thing is, a lot of times I start at the top, right? I'll go to the COO. This is a real live example. Now, my COO, I found, he and my CISO are super well connected. So I might not need to talk to him as much. However, he will tell me who I need to talk to, right? And why. And so there's a part about my job that I call a listening tour, right? Where I'm just going to meet people and listen. I just want to listen first. I don't want to offer you any security services. I don't want to give you a report of your risk. I don't want to talk about who's owning what and what's your remediation plan. I don't want to do any of that. I want to sit down, I want to talk to you, and I just want to listen. I want to understand what you do, what you're planning to do. Have you worked with security? How has that been? What are your biggest challenges? What are some of the problems we've helped you solve? What are your biggest wins? Where are your biggest opportunities? And by doing that, I think that helps with that business first lens, but then it also takes their defenses down, because when people hear cybersecurity, they get scared. It's something they don't understand. They think about hackers and hoodies, that I click on the wrong thing, I'm gonna lose my job, when it's so much more complex and sometimes even simple than that. Right? And so essentially what I'm able to do now is really understand the psyche and perspective of the people who are leading these business teams, and I'm able to cater and craft my security strategy to align with what they need. When the business understands that you are actually there to help them, right, and actually enable them, they are much more likely to bring you in. And so I think it really starts with listening first, always being curious and understanding how what we offer can support and align with what their goals are.
Nicole, I have approximately 1 million more questions for you. And before I launch into those, I want to pause and ask if anyone in the room has any questions for Nicole or I. Hello.
How much of security today is protecting vulnerabilities and malfeasance and just in general showing corporations or companies or whatever you deal with what they are not deploying, what they're not using effectively and moving through this ecosystem?
If you don't mind, I'll actually repeat that and ask you if I got it right, as well as today's session is being recorded, so I want to capture it on the microphone. If I heard that correctly, the question is, how much of security today has to do with technical exploits, and how much of security has to do with communicating to folks the gaps in terms of security controls? Did I get that right? Nicole, I'd love to know what you think about it.
I think it's all a mixed bag, and I don't think you can have one without the other, right? But I also think there's another piece of it too, where the first thing you touched on was, it sounded like, what's the opportunity to enhance our usage of our tools, right? I think that's a big part of it. I think the other part is, how are we making sure that all of the things that we're speaking about that have gaps are actually relevant, right? Or things that we want to prioritize. Or how are people making use of the technology that we have? Or is the technology that we have the right fit? Can it grow and scale if that's where we are, or can it sustain us where we are? So I think it is those things, but I think there's so many more layers, because security now is not just a back office function. It's becoming more and more prevalent because our customers are asking about it, right? We need to know about the vendors that we're working with and what their security posture looks like. So it's become a much more holistic layer of business as opposed to more of a support and risk management piece.
Yeah, if I can just add like a layer on top of what Nicole was saying, I think if I were to ask a very blunt version of your question, then it might sound something like, is security all about incidents and managing incidents, or is it all about figuring out what are best practices and trying to do those best practices? I think there's a lot of different ways that we all could look at security. I think the incident focus is a useful way. I personally think the list of best practices and checking off the boxes is a little less useful, although there are some very practical applications for that. If I take a step back and I ask myself, what is the point of security in the first place? The point of security is to protect something of value. And cybersecurity is about protecting stuff that's digitally valuable, of which so much is today. I think the complication gets in, there's a difference between measuring value creation and value protection. And I think the job of doing value protection and of identifying and communicating appropriate activities depending on an organization's risk tolerance, I think that's really where the devil's in the details a little bit. Another pet peeve that I have about some of our industry frameworks, NIST 853, for example, is a 500-page long document. I mean, it is just too much. It is too much, and I think folks get overwhelmed. And I think there's an opportunity for us as security people to say, look, now, I always get these two mixed up, which is complex and which is complicated.
I'm going for complex.
It's complex, but it's not complicated. It's one of those. I have to look it up to get it right. Ultimately, what it's about is it's about governance, finding security problems, fixing security problems, and preventing security problems. That's actually all it's about. We don't actually need 500 pages to talk about it. The other thing that I think makes it endlessly fascinating is we as security people, we love our analogies. And so I actually think that we get analogies wrong a lot of the time. I don't think, for example, that security is a vitamin or a painkiller. I don't think security is a Band-Aid. I don't think security can be bolt-on or injected. I actually have a rather unusual analogy that I use for describing security, which is a dance. There's actually a ton of different people involved, and it has to do with the interactions of all the people. And I think to your second point, part of security is getting people to do stuff. Getting other people to do stuff can be really hard. And I think requires a lot of the influence type of role that you're talking about. Thank you so much for your question. Yes.
Thank you for that excellent presentation, Dr. Arnall. We're talking about TV networks. I know the right is it has to be very securely bound with so many people playing games and leading these sports and so forth and things. So my question to you is, how do you choose a security partner based on what you look at the vendor, what kind of services, and who is the team behind you guys? I'm sure you don't make the final decision. Is there a team behind them who sits down and says, well, this is the kind of vendor you want to be part of because they have a great service? If you could just maybe elaborate on that.
So the question was, how do we determine which vendors we choose to work with? So I think it's a combination of a few things. I think the first thing is, one, really being clear on what our needs are, right? Are we developing something? Are we protecting something? Are we doing a little bit of both? Like, what is the business reason for this thing that we want to do? And in order to do that thing securely, what do we need, right? I think it's first about being very clear on what our needs are. The second thing is then we begin to evaluate the vendors based on those needs, right? So does this vendor meet this need? And then as we are a very rapidly growing and scaling organization, we doubled in size over the pandemic, right? Now we're moving just out of games into entertainment. We've got a Netflix series. We've got Riot Games Music, a virtual record label. We've got our esports. We're doing so much. There's another layer where we have to think about, does this vendor have the capacity to scale and meet our future needs, right? Because then we don't have to always go and search for a new vendor, take them through the entire process, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think the third part is, what is the security posture of that vendor, right? How reliable, how much can we trust this vendor to not only perform the service, but to protect what they have access to if they're going to have access to SPI, trade secrets, et cetera. And then there's another layer of cost. Does this make sense from a cost perspective, not only from what we're paying, but the actual risk that we're avoiding by engaging with this vendor? So it's a very multi-layered decision. And then depending on who in the business is making that choice, right, will essentially influence who are the decision makers. So there's no one, person deciding, right? It's a combination of business, finance, security, legal, compliance, et cetera.
Yes. Hi. Oh, thank you, Claire.
Hi, I'm a big fan of Riot, Runeterra specifically.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask, when you're providing a live service that does have so many users, whether those be customers or players, what are some of the challenges and considerations that go into, some of your player base potentially being those malicious actors, whether they be trying to cheat in the game or hack into your infrastructure?
Yes, so we get a lot of that. And we're essentially protecting everything from DDoS attacks to in-game player experience where it deals with cheat. So we have an anti-cheat team, which is common among the video game industry. But essentially, we rely on players to report when other players are doing something that we don't deem acceptable or that violates our usage policy. It is a very profitable business to actually sell cheat accounts is something that we're learning. And so we have to figure out, how do we essentially begin to understand the dynamic or the behaviors or kind of the life cycle path of an account that's going to be that, and stop it in its tracks without moving too fast and impacting that, what might be a viable player's experience, right? So, and then we also want to make sure that first, let me say, we're a very player-focused company, right? So our players are our customers. But on the other aspect, we also want to make sure that we create a safe environment and a healthy environment for our players to play. And then there's another layer of we as a company want to make sure that we're respecting the data that we collect from our players, right? And so making sure that we're not leveraging that data or using that data publicly in a way that doesn't align with business. So there's this ever-evolving and ongoing assessment of what's happening in our games and what's happening with our people, and always looking to make sure that we keep player experience positive, we keep associate experience positive, and we have this kind of underlying culture of respect across the board, so that we keep our players happy and that we keep our employees happy as well.
Yeah. Yes.
So if you view security as kind of like an ecosystem of inputs and outputs, I'm curious, how have you successfully quantified security's value proposition in that ecosystem, and how have you leveraged that to accommodate the doubling in your scale over the last year or so through the pandemic?
So, great question. I think it's what we all find as a challenge in this industry, right? Because so much of what we do is prevention, right? It's like, how do you calculate prevention outside of avoidance, or how can you quantify something that may or may not have happened? Exactly. So one of the things that I like to look at, and I don't know that I have all the answers for this question, I don't know that any of us do, right? But one of the things that I like to do is look at how, so to go back to the other gentleman's point about incidents, right? I think there's so much value in incident history. And of course, you have to have good data to have good analysis. So that in itself is its own challenge. But you have to, right, you have to know you have incidents.
Know
right?
about the incidents that are happening.
Right. So that in itself is an entire challenge. But once you have some data, right, looking at that and exploring like what those trends are, right? So like, what are our top incidents and what are the root causes of those? And then how do we solve for those, right? But then there's another bucket of what are the incidents that we're seeing starting to increase? Pardon me. And then how do we manage for that? So that's kind of at the micro company layer. Then there's the industry layer, right? So what are our brothers and sisters in the industry battling with, right? There's an exercise that I've done on this team and other security teams where we look at some of the big incidents are happening and then we replay that in our own ecosystem, right? Would we have been that impacted? Do we have the controls in place to identify that? To protect us from that. And then thinking about what the downstream impact of that would have been. So I think there's a combination of, first of all, making sure that you have the right data, right? Making sure that that data is being leveraged, not only looking at it from a look back perspective of what's happened, but how can we leverage that to inform how we want to move forward, but then also looking collectively at the industry and seeing, again, I think it was mentioned in Carolyn's earlier presentation, we've got to stay ahead of the bad actors, right? So how are we constantly getting information and insight to develop that ongoing strategy? I think it's a challenge we all face.
Yeah. I have some thoughts. I want to share a story about a way that we tried once that did not work. I'd love to hear it. Which is we tried to use FAIR. Mm-hmm. And I actually think FAIR is a really cool and a really strong framework. The problem that I experienced and I've heard about is that when you take security people and they start to talk about dollars, the conversation doesn't go any further than questioning the assumptions that went into the calculations in the first place. And you actually, I think it's really hard to get that to a productive place. I actually think that broadly speaking, security people putting dollar amounts on ROI tends not to go super well. I think there's an opportunity for security people to talk about what they're pretty good about talking about, which is risk tolerance. And you can't exactly go into a meeting with all the chief executives at your company and say, all right, folks, what's everyone feeling like today for risk tolerance on a scale of 1 to 10? You know, what are you thinking? Like, actually, you can't do that. You know, you can try an approach that says, oh, you know, we handle this payment data, we need to do X, Y, Z because of PCI, but then you're always gonna get the person in the room saying like, what if we just don't do it and then we just pay the fine? You know, like, let's make that type of a decision. And sometimes, depending on a lot of different factors, maybe that's the right decision. I don't know. I think there's a way to come up with jointly owned risk management objectives. I actually wrote a book on this topic. It's called Security Metrics: The Beginner's Guide, published by McGraw-Hill in 2011. Got into the Cybersecurity Canon Hall of Fame 10 years later in 2021. And there's a LinkedIn Learning course. Everything I know about this topic in 40 minutes. I will totally post it on my LinkedIn, and then everyone can watch it at no cost. There are 7 risk management objectives that I've thought of. It's stuff like security gives us a competitive advantage. We need to do security because of due diligence. We need to do it because of compliance, contractual reasons, that category. But there's also a category that's like, we actually want to produce a secure product. And there's ways to go one level deeper where there's an opportunity for a security person and a business person to actually identify a common goal. Whether that goal is, hey, we've noticed that the same attacks keep happening over and over again. How can we stop those from having an impact? That's actually a statement that people can reasonably get behind. You don't have to be technical to agree with that statement. And that is sufficiently defined such that you can actually assign a project plan and a budget to that statement.
So you're almost tying it back to a dollar figure.
Exactly, but not in the way where you're like, a compromised account is $7 and this, I mean, like just stuff that people are like firing down, like no, 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 no. Another one is, hey, can we all agree that we're gonna actively look for and fix any security problems that are just like really easy and really simple? That's something that folks can get behind. And you can actually build a program, build a project plan, build a budget, and say, all right, let's do this. I've got the whole list of 7. Would be happy to share it. Thank you so much for the question. We have, Nicole, I've been like gazing at your watch this whole time. All right, folks. Thank you, Claire. This actually has worked out. This happens to me every time we're on stage. I'm always like,
I'm glad
look
I
at
wore my
Nicole's
watch
watch.
today.
What time is it? It's really convenient. Thank you.
Perfect.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
One topic you haven't touched on is state-sponsored hacking. And I think, sorry. So my question is, you know, way back, it used to be malicious hackers who were doing it for fun. Then along came ransomware. And I think now the state-sponsored hacking is reaching a point where it's going to start affecting, you know, private businesses rather than, you know, states. They've taken care of that. What is the protection against that? I mean, the sophistication is much greater than anything that we've seen before.
Yep. So first, just for fun, I have a quiz question for the group because you brought up ransomware. Does anyone know when the first ransomware attack was? 1989. I was 6 years old. 1989. And in 1989, they would like take over your computer screen and then ask you to literally mail $198 to a PO box in Panama. In 2021, the average ransomware payment was $500,000. And ransomware, this is so funny and so frustrating to me because I can't tell you how many media interviews I did last year where they were like, what are we gonna do about ransomware? And I was like, actually, it's not easy, but it is simple. Actually, if you just have a proper asset inventory, if you look for vulnerabilities, patch those vulnerabilities, and back up your software, and then check your backups, actually, you're immune to ransomware. So I think that, yes, nation states, absolutely. All of them, right? And we are just as vulnerable as we've ever been. But largely speaking, I would venture to say that 99% of it is preventable if we just did proper things. And it's not easy to do proper things because it's not easy to have a completely up-to-date asset inventory. It's actually not easy to find and fix vulnerabilities. It's not fun or sexy to say, what's your 2023 priority? I'm gonna test our backups and make sure they work. I don't know that an initiative like that is gonna make it to any company's 2023 roadmap at a strategic level. And yet, if companies actually did it, there could not be a ransomware problem. I would be so delighted if all we heard about in the news was really actually sophisticated attacks and not the intern used a password which was company name 123 on the web server. Where it's not like, oh, the admin got phished. Dead simple things. And we're all, so I don't know that that's. Or people aren't allowed to talk about them. I think that's another actually really big problem with this industry that is slowly changing. I think that 10 or 15 years ago, you were like not supposed to talk about breaches. And today people are like, let's talk about what happened. And I think we have an opportunity to go even further. Folks, we are out of time.